Keanu sat in his home office, staring out of the window as a troubling thought grew in his mind. His friend had told him about a visit to a fancy restaurant, where the workers treated people differently based on how they looked. This made Keanu feel uneasy. He always prided himself on creating a welcoming place for everyone, but now he wondered if that was true when he wasn't around. He needed to find out for himself. He decided to visit the restaurant, but he wouldn't go as Keanu Reeves, the famous actor everyone knew. Instead, he would dress as an ordinary man, someone who didn't look rich or famous. Keanu thought that would help him see how the staff really treated people who didn't fit their idea of luxury. He wanted to be sure his restaurant was as welcoming as he thought it was. The next morning, Keanu went to his closet to find clothes for his disguise. He picked out an old denim jacket, some worn-out jeans, and a baseball cap. To make it look even more convincing, he made his sneakers look scuffed and borrowed an old messenger bag from a friend. When he looked in the mirror, he almost didn't recognize himself. Instead of a polished movie star, he saw an ordinary man, someone who could blend into any crowd. Before leaving, Keanu practiced the story he would tell. His name would be Jack, and he would pretend to be a man down on his luck, looking for a simple, affordable meal. After rehearsing his plan, Keanu took a deep breath and left for the restaurant. When Keanu arrived at the Silver Spoon restaurant, he couldn't help feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. The fancy restaurant had shiny glass doors and soft golden lights that created an atmosphere of elegance. Outside, a valet greeted customers, smiling and offering to help with their cars. Keanu felt nervous, wondering if his disguise would hold up. "Here goes nothing," he muttered to himself, pulling his baseball cap down lower to hide his face. Inside, the restaurant looked just as he remembered. Soft jazz music played in the background, the tables were set with crisp white cloths, and a quiet hum of conversation filled the air. A young woman with perfectly styled hair stood at the entrance. She was the hostess. As soon as she saw Keanu, her eyes briefly flickered, and her face seemed to tighten. She didn't seem very welcoming. "Good evening," she said, but her tone wasn't warm. "Do you have a reservation?" Keanu shook his head and smiled politely. "No, I was hoping to get a table for one. I don't mind sitting at the counter if it's busy." The hostess looked around the room. Many tables were empty, but instead of offering Keanu a seat, she hesitated. "I'm afraid we're very busy tonight. We're only taking reservations," she said, sounding frustrated. Keanu felt his heart sink but stayed hopeful. "Are you sure?" "I don't mind waiting." The hostess sighed and rolled her eyes. "Fine, you can sit at the counter, but make it quick. We'll need the space soon." Keanu quietly thanked her and walked to the counter. The seat was uncomfortable, and the shiny bar reflected his face, reminding him of his disguise. As he sat there, Keanu noticed how the staff ignored him. They only seemed to smile at customers who were wearing fancy clothes, like suits and dresses. He felt invisible. Minutes passed, and finally the waiter came over. He was tall, sharply dressed, and looked like he was in a hurry. "What can I get for you?" he asked, barely glancing at Keanu. Keanu smiled politely. "Just a bowl of soup and some water, please." The waiter scribbled something on his notepad. "Anything else?" "No, that's all." "Thank you," Keanu replied. Without another word, the waiter walked away, barely acknowledging Keanu's presence. Keanu watched as other diners were treated much better. A couple nearby got recommendations for the chef's special, and a family at another table was given free breadsticks. Keanu felt ignored and alone as he waited for his food. While waiting, Keanu overheard the staff laughing and talking to each other, but it seemed like they only cared about the people who looked rich or important. He noticed an elderly man sitting a few stools down. The man was sipping his coffee quietly and seemed like a regular, but the staff didn't seem to notice him at all. Finally, after a long wait, Keanu's soup arrived. It was cold, and it had taken almost 30 minutes to get to him. He tasted it and tried not to show his disappointment. This wasn't the kind of service Keanu expected from a restaurant like this. Before leaving, Keanu decided to test the staff one last time. He called the waiter over and asked for a refill of water. The waiter sighed loudly, his frustration obvious. "You can get it yourself over there," he said, pointing to a water station across the room. Keanu nodded and went to the water station. As he filled his glass, he couldn't help but feel sad. This wasn't how he wanted his restaurant to be. He wanted everyone to feel welcome and treated with respect, no matter how they looked. As Keanu left the restaurant, he felt a heaviness in his heart. It wasn't just the lukewarm soup that bothered him, it was the way the staff had treated him. They had ignored him because he didn't look wealthy or important. He wondered if the staff treated everyone this way depending on how they appeared. Keanu decided he couldn't make a judgment based on just one visit. He He needed to come back and see more. He decided to visit the restaurant again over the next few days, each time wearing a different disguise. His goal was to see how the staff treated a variety of customers. Those who didn't look like they could leave big tips or make a lasting impression. The next evening, Keanu returned to the restaurant. This time, he dressed like a construction worker. He wore a hard hat, dusty clothes, and scuffed boots that made a noise as he walked. When the hostess saw him, she raised an eyebrow and sighed, clearly not happy to see him again. "You again?" she asked, her voice filled with frustration. Keanu smiled sheepishly and said, "Yeah, I liked the food yesterday, so I thought I'd come back." The hostess sighed again and looked at the reservation book. Keanu went to his restaurant, the Silver Spoon, 4 days in a row to see how the staff treated the guests. He wanted to understand if his restaurant really lived up to the values of kindness and warmth that he believed in. The first time he visited, he dressed casually, and right from the moment he walked in, he noticed something strange. A young woman at the door, the hostess, greeted him without much enthusiasm. "We're busy again tonight," she said flatly, pointing to the counter. Keanu didn't mind waiting, so he nodded and headed to the counter. But as he sat there, Keanu couldn't help but notice the other guests. He had purposely come at a quieter time, thinking there would be space for him, but instead, he was directed to the least desirable seat. He looked around and saw a young woman in a sharp business suit entering the restaurant. The hostess greeted her with a warm smile, took her coat, and led her to a nice table by the window. Then a couple walked in wearing designer clothes, and they were immediately offered complimentary drinks while they waited for their food. Meanwhile, Keanu was left at the counter, ignored, waiting for his soup. When it finally arrived, it was late and the bread was slightly burnt. The waiter didn't check to see if the meal was good or if Keanu was happy. Keanu felt like something was off. The way the staff treated him was very different from how they treated the other guests. He started to wonder if how he looked had anything to do with it. Keanu thought that perhaps he had just been unlucky that day. So, on the second day he decided to test it out. This time he wore a neat button-up shirt and slacks. He wanted to see if dressing better would change how the staff treated him. He walked into the Silver Spoon with a sense of hope, but things didn't change as much as he had hoped. The hostess smiled politely when she saw him and led him to a table instead of the counter. It was an improvement, but not by much. The waiter was slightly more attentive, offering some menu recommendations, and he made sure Keanu's water glass was filled. But the kindness he received still didn't feel sincere. It seemed like the staff was just doing their job without truly caring about Keanu. They weren't treating him as someone they valued, just someone they needed to serve. Keanu thought about the other guests in the restaurant. The rich ones were being treated like they mattered, while he was being given only the bare minimum. Keanu realized that the difference in treatment wasn't because of how he looked on the second day, but because of how the staff viewed him based on his appearance. On the third day, Keanu decided to dress differently. He wore a Hawaiian shirt, put on sunglasses, and hung a camera around his neck to look like a tourist. He wanted to see if that would change how the staff treated him. He entered the Silver Spoon, walking with exaggerated steps, pretending to be unsure of everything. He spoke in broken English, trying to make himself look like someone who was out of place. The reaction from the staff was immediate and disheartening. The waiter spoke to him in a slow and condescending tone, as if he thought Keanu couldn't understand simple instructions. The other guests looked at him, some even smirking, while the staff made no effort to hide their impatience. Keanu felt like he was invisible. The warm treatment he had seen for the wealthier guests wasn't there for him. He was treated as if he didn't matter just because of how he looked and acted. That was when Keanu realized that his restaurant had a serious problem. It wasn't just about having good food or a nice atmosphere, it was about the way the staff made people feel. He thought about how the Silver Spoon was supposed to be a place of warmth, where everyone felt welcome no matter who they were or where they came from. But from what he had experienced, that wasn't the case. The treatment people received seemed to depend on how much money they looked like they had, or how polished and well-dressed they appeared. Keanu knew that he couldn't ignore what he had learned. He had to do something about it, not just for the sake of his business but because it went against everything he believed in. He returned home that evening, his mind racing with thoughts on how to address the issue. He couldn't let this continue. His restaurant had to be a place that treated everyone the same, rich, poor, or anyone in between. It had to be a place where kindness was the rule, not the exception. The next day, Keanu made a plan. The first step was to call a meeting with all of his staff. He wanted to talk to them, not to blame or shame anyone, but to explain what he had observed. He wanted them to understand how important it was for everyone who entered the Silver Spoon to feel valued, no matter what they looked like or how much money they had. He would also introduce a new training program to help the staff become more aware of their actions and how they could make all customers feel respected. In addition to the training, Keanu wanted to make sure that he could keep an eye on things. He didn't want the staff to only treat customers well when they knew he was around. So, he decided to do undercover visits, where he would come in without them knowing it was him, to make sure they were always treating customers with kindness and respect. Keanu hoped this would help keep everyone on track. The meeting with the staff took place the following morning. It was unusual for Keanu to call such a meeting, so the staff was curious and anxious about what it was about. When Keanu walked in, he was dressed in his usual simple clothes, but there was a certain firmness in his demeanor. The room became silent as he began to speak. Keanu told them that he had been visiting the restaurant in disguise over the past few days. He wanted to see how the staff treated guests when he wasn't around. The staff was surprised and some of them looked uncomfortable. Keanu continued, explaining that what he had seen was troubling. He said, "I saw that people who looked wealthy or important were treated with kindness, while others who didn't look as polished were treated poorly. They were ignored or served with impatience." The room was quiet. Some staff members looked down at their feet, while others exchanged worried glances. Keanu didn't get angry though. He said, "This is not what the Silver Spoon is about. I didn't build this place to treat people based on how much money they have or how they look. I want every guest, no matter who they are, to feel welcomed and valued." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I'm not here to blame anyone. We all make mistakes and sometimes we don't even realize it. But now that we see the problem, we have to make a change." Keanu went on to explain the steps they would take to create a more inclusive and respectful culture in the restaurant. He said they would bring in a professional trainer to help them understand unconscious biases and teach them how to be more empathetic with guests. The staff would also have regular training to improve their customer service skills. Keanu told them that they would also introduce an anonymous feedback system where customers could share their experiences, both good and bad. This way the staff could hold themselves accountable and keep improving. In addition to the training and feedback system, Keanu introduced a weekly kindness challenge. Every staff member would be encouraged to go above and beyond for at least one customer each week. They would then share the stories of their acts of kindness during their staff meetings to inspire each other. Keanu ended the meeting by reminding them of the real reason they were there. "We're not just here to serve food. We're here to create an experience to bring joy to the people who come in. And that means treating everyone with respect." At first, the staff was hesitant. Some didn't understand why this was necessary, while others were nervous about the changes. But as the training sessions continued, they started to realize how important these changes were. They learned that even small actions like smiling, being patient, and listening to customers could make a huge difference in someone's experience. Keanu made sure to be there every day, not just as a boss but as a mentor. He worked alongside his staff during busy shifts, modeling the behavior he wanted to see in them. Slowly, the culture at the Silver Spoon began to change. The staff became more thoughtful and considerate. They started to treat every guest with the same level of kindness and respect, no matter who they were. One day, a young waitress named Clara approached Keanu after her shift. "Mr. Reeves," she said hesitantly, "I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. At first, I didn't realize how much my attitude could impact someone's day. But now I see it, and it feels really good to know I'm making a difference." Keanu smiled and thanked Clara. He was proud of how the staff was improving, and he knew that the changes they were making would last. The real test came a few weeks later when Keanu decided to visit the Silver Spoon again, but this time he dressed as a homeless man. He wore tattered clothes, had an unshaven face, and looked like he hadn't eaten in a while. He was nervous as he walked through the restaurant doors, pretending to be someone who had very little money. To his surprise, the experience was completely different. The hostess greeted him with a warm smile and welcomed him into the restaurant. She didn't flinch when he said he didn't have much money. Instead, she said, "Of course. We have a soup special today that's delicious and affordable. Let me find you a nice seat." Keanu sat down and the waiter came over with a smile. He treated Keanu with kindness, offering him water and bread while he waited for his soup. Keanu felt at ease. It was clear that the staff had learned to treat everyone with respect, no matter what they looked like. Keanu was happy with the changes he had seen. The Silver Spoon had truly transformed. It was no longer just a fancy restaurant for rich people. It was a place where kindness was served with every meal. Customers left glowing reviews and the staff was proud of the work they were doing. One evening, Keanu stood outside the Silver Spoon, watching the staff interact with the customers. He saw a young man hold the door open for an elderly couple, and a waiter kneeling down to help a child choose from the menu. The atmosphere was warm and there was laughter in the air. Keanu smiled, knowing that the Silver Spoon had finally become the place he had always dreamed it would be, a place where everyone felt at home. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.